Hello. My name is Ben Keller. This is going to be the first video in my research series on whatever topic kind of interests me at the time. Right now, it's going to be the history of the U.S., firstly looking at the history of all the states, more importantly, kind of understanding the geography of all of the American states, a little bit of the history, somewhat of the background and information, and then a little bit more of like the modern times. What are their economies, kind of, or where do their economic production systems come from? Where do they make their state revenue from? What's the population? What are the capitals? So it's kind of the beginning of the series. So without further ado, we'll be starting with all of the eastern states of the United States. Firstly, focusing on Maine, the northernmost state of the United States. Yeah, so let's dive right into it. I have a little bit of notes prepared, but mostly trying to go off the dome. But yeah, starting from the history of Maine, its first contact actually with like a modern expedition was in 1497, I believe, with John Cabot and his exploration crew that was funded by King James IV, who was just there on a fishing expedition looking for new fishing routes and fishing areas, and therefore described the waters mostly in terms of the aquatic life. But having said that, along the coast of Maine, there was swarms of fish where you didn't even need nets to catch them. You could just drop a bucket on a stone and you would catch fish. So kind of alluding to a very lush aquatic life. They never made any settlements there, but could have quickly surveyed the land and realized it was a very geographically foresty area with a lot of, aquatic life. Moving forward to the first settlement was in 1607, part of the Plymouth Company. So the Plymouth Company was a it was a company that was, I think, how do I say this? It was chartered, that's the right word. So the Plymouth Company was chartered by King James? No, who was it? King James III. It was by King James III, who was trying to colonize the specific longitudes and set up colonies between the 35th and 41st longitude on the map, and creating settlements within that area, essentially creating what we know today as New England. That kind of leads forward to a little bit of the exploration of John Smith, who was exploring and trekking through this New England area made up of Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and then Maine. And that's kind of like the early settlement information that I looked into. Obviously, the Maine settlement, only the Plymouth Company within Maine only lasted a year. And other than that, it was kind of a back and forth between smaller settlements, Native American tribes, the Franco-American, or not at the time Franco-Americans, but the French, also participating a little bit in creating smaller settlements, but no real important history back then. The next time where Maine really becomes interesting is within the American Revolutionary War, and in 1779. So the American Revolutionary War was from 1775 to 1783, and in 1779 it was a kind of somewhat contested area, but there was never really a push or a incentive for the Americans to put soldiers or even bring a navy into that area. It was a little bit more desolate, not much contention, not any large shipping ports or anything that was of importance. So, but there was a point where some British colonists tried to create it and a settlement, as they would call New Ireland. But after the war ended, this kind of failed. The next point when Maine was important was in 1812 during the War of 1812, where the British were trying to have or implement the imputation system. They were kind of like stealing soldiers, where they would just take drunk people, throw them on ships, and then tell them, "Yeah, you're now a sailor for the British," or would also fund and egg on the Native American tribes to continue to attack the American settlers because they were salty that they lost the war. So, of course, the British are always salty. Anyways, moving on. The next time the Maine was kind of an important topic was in 1820, when Maine actually became a state. Before that, it was always just a territory, part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which had kind of been a common theme again for most of New England. So with New Hampshire, I think it used to be also part of Massachusetts until, actually, no, that might not be true. I think within the early settlements, New Hampshire became its own area or its own territory, but Vermont was also always a territory of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But then in 1883, when the states finally were able to unionize, Vermont became its own territory or its own state. Going back to 1820, so Maine becomes a state, but that only happens in February after multiple congressional hearings from the Union, and the process itself to become a state was interesting because other than the 13 original colonies who all became states, the process required a state to form its own constitution, and then they would have to essentially just pitch themselves and kind of fight for why they should be a state to Congress, who would then ratify their constitution, and then bada bing, bada boom, they'd become a state. But at the time, it was becoming kind of an important topic to have a balance between free states and slave states. And so the introduction of Maine into the Union was a contested subject because at the time there was a balance between free states and slave states, but then in 1820, obviously adding another state that would be a free state, which most northern states were, would lead to an imbalance, and so that led to the Missouri Compromise, which was also a territory at the time, but which was not a state. So I believe in March or sometime after March, the Missouri Compromise was confirmed, and Missouri also became a state. Therefore, again, balancing the number of free and slave states. Now, kind of moving on to the economy in Maine. So the most important economy or the most important drivers of the economy were furring and mostly fishing, but the most important was lumber industry. It was a huge forestry, or there was a lot of forests that were very lush, so you would have a lot of lumberjacks looking for pine tree and cedar wood, going deep into the Maine territories. But what was also nice about it was Maine has a lot of rivers going through it, so these lumber companies could just float most of the lumber downstream until it reached either a waterfall or almost the coastline, and then would break it down. And this also gave rise to a lot of shipbuilding in the Maine area. And then obviously the wood would be able to be shipped worldwide. So merchants could become very successful also at this time. But even before Maine really took off in 1820 as its own state, It had its own setbacks and almost mass exodus of individuals with the War of 1812. So a lot of, fighting going on. There was a very cold winter during that period too, or sorry, a very cold summer. So not a lot of incentive in terms of weather conditions. And then finally, you had booming states like Ohio. You had 20 years later the gold rush in California. You also had just overall westward expansion becoming more um, maybe not lucrative, but looking very appealing and looking like it could be advantageous for individuals trying to gain more independence, have their own land. And for lumberjacks, they kind of moved to other states like Michigan or Wisconsin, where they also had a lot of forestry and they took their lumberjack skills with them. Um, so that's kind of the main part of the economy that was built up. Um, let's see, is there anything else that's kind of important? Uh, yeah, so nowadays a lot of the revenue that goes to Maine comes from tourism. So they spend a lot of money kind of reinstituting their parks, cleaning their rivers, and spending a lot of um, effort just making Maine an attractive um, piece of history and place where there's a lot of sustained, green life. So tourists can understand what the early settlement life was like. You also look at a lot of these towns, like you have Portland, you have their capital Augusta, and then you have another town. It's called Lewiston, and Lewiston itself could literally be a European um, small British town. It's like all small brick old buildings, very small population. Looks very European, so a big tourist area. But like I said, the capital of Maine is Augusta. I think it has a population of like 19,000, incredibly small. Their biggest city is Portland with 70,000 people. Um, and I think that's kind of all the important stuff. Maine is a population of 1.4 million people. Um, yeah, that's Maine. Um, this was an exciting first episode. I will have a lot more energy for these next ones. Maine was a decent place to start, but I don't think there's a lot of riveting history behind it. So we'll see how Vermont, New Hampshire go. Might combine those two. Um, but other than that, thanks for watching. It's more for myself, but good on you if you're learning some history. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.